Metal has always attracted outsized personalities. The genre is built on intensity, ego, and a fundamental refusal to be told what to do. And for the most part, that's exactly what makes it compelling. But there's a difference between being a rebel and being genuinely difficult to be around. There's a difference between an edge and a pattern of behavior that burns through bandmates, alienates fans, and leaves a trail of wrecked relationships across decades. This list is about that second category. These are 20 of the most controversial, combustible, and genuinely difficult figures in heavy metal and hard rock history, ranked by the scale and consistency of the behavior. Not just the mythology around it. We're talking documented incidents, on-record feuds, departures, and controversies that went beyond the usual rock star excess and into something more sustained. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. This channel covers real metal history, from the legends to the complicated truths behind them. Let's get into it. Number 20. Sebastian Bach. Sebastian Bach arrived with Skid Row in the late 1980s, carrying one of the most naturally powerful voices in the glam metal era. A high, clean tenor, with real range and genuine aggression when the songs called for it. Skid Row and Slave to the Grind are legitimate records, and Bach's vocal performances on them hold up as among the best in the genre for that period. The professional problems were consistent and well documented. Bach was involved in multiple public confrontations with fans and media, had a famously volatile relationship with the rest of Skid Row that contributed to the band's fractured later years, and has maintained a public persona across interviews and social media that has frequently generated controversy for its combativeness. His departure from Skid Row was followed by years of public commentary from both sides about what went wrong. Bach has never presented himself as someone interested in de-escalation, and his public record over 4 decades reflects that consistently. Number 19. Rob Halford. Rob Halford's position on a list like this requires context. The criticisms directed at him, primarily from within the industry and from people who worked with him, center on perfectionism, a strong sense of his own worth and position, and a tendency to be dismissive of what he considered lesser work. These are not uncommon traits in musicians who spent decades at the top of their genre, and they read differently than the behavior of several other people on this list. What is documented is that Halford's relationships within and around Judas Priest were at various points difficult. His departure from the band in 1992 and the period that followed involved public tension and competing accounts of what had gone wrong. He returned to Judas Priest in 2003 and has remained with the band since. His standing as one of the most accomplished vocalists in metal history is not genuinely contested. What some people in his orbit over the years found more complicated was the gap between that stature and how it occasionally manifested in professional interactions. Number 18. Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne's off-stage behavior during his peak years in the late 1970s and through the 1980s is extensively documented, much of it by Osbourne himself, in interviews and in his autobiography. The bat incident at a Des Moines concert in January 1982, where he bit the head off what he believed to be a rubber prop thrown by an audience member, is the most famous single moment, but it sits within a much broader pattern of alcohol and drug-driven behavior that caused real problems for the people around him. Sharon Osbourne, who became his manager and later his wife, has spoken extensively about how difficult those years were and the degree to which managing Ozzy meant managing a constant state of crisis. His unpredictability during live performances, including incidents of collapsing on stage and shows that were visibly compromised, was a documented professional issue. The dismissal of Randy Rhoads from his original band and various personnel conflicts through those years reflected the difficulty of working around someone whose behavior was as erratic as Osbourne's was during that period. Number 17. Joey Jordison. Joey Jordison was the founding drummer of Slipknot and one of the primary architects of the band's sound. His combination of technical speed, precise timing, and theatrical intensity behind the kit was central to what made Slipknot's early records work. His standing among drummers in the metal world was genuinely high. His departure from Slipknot in December 2013 generated significant controversy, in part because it was announced by the band without explanation. The details that have emerged since, from both Jordison and other band members, suggest a combination of personal struggles. Jordison was later diagnosed with transverse myelitis, a spinal condition that affected his ability to play, and interpersonal tensions within the group. Jordison died in July 2021. The accounts of his personality that came from people who worked with him were consistently mixed. Technically formidable, difficult to work with in certain circumstances, and dealing with personal pressures that were not fully visible at the time. Number 16. Dave Lombardo. Dave Lombardo's relationship with Slayer is one of the most extensively documented cases of financial and creative tension in metal history, and the details are specific enough to move beyond vague characterizations of ego or attitude. Lombardo was born in Havana, Cuba, on February 16, 1965, and left Cuba with his family at approximately 15 months old. His two older brothers had already been sent to the United States through a Catholic Church humanitarian program called Operation Peter Pan. More than 5 decades later, in January 2018, Lombardo returned to Cuba with his mother and his then-fiancée, visiting his childhood home and his father's closed butcher shop. His introduction to music came early. At 8 years old, he performed Santana's Everybody's Everything on bongo drums. His father bought him a Pearl Maxwin drum set at 10, and Lombardo taught himself to play primarily by working through Kiss's Alive album, particularly the drum solo in 100,000 Years. He briefly worked as a mobile DJ under the name A Touch of Class before committing fully to rock. He formed bands under various names through high school, and graduated from Southgate High School in June 1983. His connection to Slayer began when he was 16. A friend told him about a guitarist named Kerry King, who lived nearby. Lombardo introduced himself, they began jamming in his garage, and King subsequently brought in Jeff Hanneman. Tom Araya followed. The four of them became Slayer. Lombardo recommended producer Rick Rubin for the band's third album, Rain in Blood, an album considered among the most influential in metal history. During the promotional tour for that record, Lombardo left the band for the first time, citing insufficient earnings following Slayer's move to a major label. His position was temporarily filled by Tony Scaglione of Whiplash. Rick Rubin personally pushed for Lombardo's return, which came in 1987. He recorded South of Heaven and Seasons in the Abyss before leaving again in 1992. This time because he wanted to be present for the birth of his first child, and the band's management scheduled tour dates during that period anyway. Lombardo held firm and was replaced. He returned again in 2001 after Jeff Hanneman pushed for it. Kerry King was initially skeptical, believing Lombardo's playing had declined during the years away. He changed his position after watching rehearsals. Lombardo's first show back was January 24, 2002, at Toad's Place in New Haven, Connecticut. He contributed to Christ Illusion and World Painted Blood, both of which were received as returns to form. His final departure came in February 2013 and is the best documented episode of the three. Lombardo disclosed that approximately 10% of tour revenue was reaching the band members, with the remaining 90% absorbed into production, management, and associated costs. He and Tom Araya commissioned an independent audit of the band's finances. Lombardo was denied access to the financial data he requested. He refused to sign a new contract that didn't guarantee commissions in writing, didn't provide audit rights, and limited his ability to speak to media about the band's business. When he proposed renegotiating on terms that would formalize financial transparency for the band members, King rejected the proposal and stated that if Lombardo didn't accept the current terms, he would be replaced. Less than a week later, Lombardo received an email from Slayer's attorney stating that his position had been filled for the upcoming tour by Paul Bostaph. Lombardo did not attend Slayer's final concert on November 30th, 2019. Outside of Slayer, Lombardo's career has been extensive. He formed the groove metal band Grip Inc., which released several albums between 1995 and 2004. He joined Fantomas, the experimental supergroup with Mike Patton, Buzz Osborne, and Trevor Dunn, and contributed to Testament's The Gathering. He played with suicidal tendencies through the mid-2000s and has also been a member of Dead Cross, The Misfits, Mr. Bungle, and Empire State Bastard, among others. In 2023, he released his first solo album, Rites of Percussion, featuring instrumental drum compositions drawing from music traditions from around the world. Lombardo also built a parallel creative life outside music. In 2004, he collaborated with composer Tyler Bates on the score for the Dawn of the Dead remake, an experience he described as a meaningful entry point into film work. He contributed to Insidious, Chapter 3, alongside composer Joseph Bishara, working in an atmospheric and ambient register that contrasted sharply with his Slayer work. In early 2014, he launched a visual art project called Rhythm Mysterium with Scene 4 Art in Los Angeles, producing 13 works created by capturing the motion and light patterns of his drumming via visual technology and translating them onto canvas. He married Paula Lombardo on February 25, 2018, at Greens Point Lighthouse in La Pro, New Brunswick, Canada, after dating for approximately 6 years. Paula, who had previously performed as a backup vocalist for Wayne Newton, met Lombardo without knowing who he was. The two formed a music project together called Venemoris, with Lombardo serving as producer and drummer, and Paula writing lyrics and performing as lead vocalist. Lombardo's nickname, the Godfather of Double Bass, reflects a consensus position among metal drummers about his influence on the technical development of the instrument within the genre. His work across 5 decades, across multiple genres and contexts, constitutes one of the more varied and substantive bodies of work in metal percussion. Halfway through the list, and we haven't even gotten to the ones who made this a genuinely difficult video to make. Hit like if you're finding this worth watching. It matters for the channel's reach. Subscribe if you haven't. Back to it. Number 15. Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent built a legitimate career in rock across the 1970s on the back of real guitar ability and high-energy live performances. His catalog from that decade, Stranglehold, Cat Scratch Fever, Free For All, represents genuinely accomplished hard rock. His reputation as one of the most polarizing figures in rock history, however, has less to do with his music and more to do with 40-plus years of public commentary that has consistently generated controversy well beyond anything the music itself produced. Nugent's interviews, public statements, and social media history include documented instances of remarks about political figures, ethnic groups, and fellow musicians that have resulted in dropped sponsorships, canceled bookings, and sustained backlash from within the music community. His response to criticism has consistently been to escalate rather than clarify. His profile in rock media has, for several decades, been driven more by his public statements than by new music. Number 14. Vince Neil. Vince Neil's documented history includes the 1984 vehicular manslaughter case covered at length elsewhere on this channel. His drunk driving killed Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle and left 2 other people seriously injured, and his sentence of 20 days in jail and a civil settlement was widely criticized as inadequate. That incident is the single most consequential item on his record, but it exists within a broader pattern of behavior, public incidents, erratic live performances, and ongoing friction with the Mötley Crüe organization that has followed him across his career. His live performances in the years after the band's initial retirement have been a consistent subject of fan commentary, with multiple documented instances of shows that were visibly below standard. His relationships with the other members of Mötley Crüe have been publicly volatile across multiple decades. Number 13. Yngwie Malmsteen. Yngwie Malmsteen is not a controversial figure musically. His technical ability on guitar is recognized by virtually everyone who has evaluated it seriously. His speed, precision, and command of classical European harmonic structures applied to electric guitar genuinely did something that hadn't been done in that way before, and his influence on neoclassical metal and on technically oriented guitar playing broadly is substantial. The professional reputation is another matter. Malmsteen has had an unusually high rate of personnel turnover across his career, with former band members consistently describing a working environment defined by his singular control over every element of the music and presentation. The Unleash the Fury incident, an altercation with a flight attendant on a transatlantic flight in 1988, documented in press coverage at the time, became the shorthand representation of a broader reputation for volatility and an inability to recognize limits on his own authority in any. Number 12. Mike Patton. Mike Patton's vocal range and creative ambition are genuine. His ability to move between styles within Faith No More, Fantomas, Mr. Bungle, Tomahawk, and his solo work represents a body of output that holds up on its own terms. He is one of the more genuinely creative frontmen in metal and experimental music from the past 4 decades. His public behavior has generated its own record. Patton has been documented in multiple incidents of stage behavior, including deliberate acts designed to provoke or disgust audiences, and his commentary about fellow musicians and the music industry has frequently been dismissive to the point of contempt. His public statements about other artists, including sustained commentary about Limp Bizkit and Fred Durst at a period when that rivalry was generating real press coverage, reflected an approach to public discourse that prioritized provocation over professionalism. For many in his orbit over the years, the creative genius and the interpersonal difficulty came as a package. Number 11. Glenn Frey. Glenn Frey's place on this list is unusual, given that the Eagles are not a metal band by any reasonable definition. His inclusion reflects the documented accounts of how he operated within the band, accounts that come from multiple sources, including Don Felder's memoir, interviews with other Eagles members, and contemporaneous press coverage over 40 years. Frey and Don Henley functioned as the Eagles' primary creative and business authority, and Frey's approach to that authority was described consistently by other members as controlling, demanding, and frequently punitive when others pushed back. Don Felder's departure from the Eagles and subsequent lawsuit against Frey and Henley produced a documented public record of the internal dynamics. The band was one of the most commercially successful in rock history, and the human cost of how it operated appears, based on the available accounts, to have been significant. Number 10. Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons of Kiss has been one of the most commercially successful businessmen in rock history, and he has stated this himself on more occasions than most listeners care to count. Kiss's merchandising operation, the licensing of the band's logo and imagery onto virtually every conceivable product category across 5 decades, is genuinely a case study in how rock can function as a brand. The sustained criticism directed at Simmons from fans, former collaborators, and peers centers on the gap between that commercial focus and what many people feel music is supposed to represent. His public statements about musicians who struggle financially, about the state of the music industry, and about his own position within it, have generated consistent backlash. Former Kiss members Ace Frehley and Peter Criss have both given interviews describing financial arrangements with the band that they felt were exploitative. Simmons's responses to these criticisms have tended to reinforce rather than address the concern. Number 9. Euronymous. Øystein Aarseth, Euronymous, was the guitarist of Mayhem and one of the central figures in establishing the Norwegian black metal scene of the early 1990s. His record label, Death Like Silence Productions, released foundational black metal recordings. His record shop in Oslo, Helvete, functioned as the organizational hub of a scene that went on to significant international influence. Aarseth's approach to building that scene was documented by multiple participants as deliberate, controlling, and oriented toward the promotion of an ideology of destruction and violence that he appeared to take seriously beyond its function as artistic positioning. He was murdered by Varg Vikernes on August 10, 1993. His death, and the circumstances surrounding it, including his own documented conduct in the period leading up to it, remain among the most discussed and analyzed events in the history of the genre. Number 8. Varg Vikernes. Already covered in detail on this channel. Vikernes was convicted of the murder of Euronymous and of involvement in multiple church arsons in Norway. He served approximately 15 years before his release in 2009. His subsequent conduct, including continued association with far-right and ethno-nationalist ideology, his 2003 prison escape and recapture, and his ongoing public activity since release, constitutes a record that goes well beyond the standard controversies of the metal world. He is one of the most documented criminal figures in the genre's history. Number 7. Courtney Love. Courtney Love is one of the more genuinely complicated figures on this list. Her band Hole produced at least one record, Live Through This, released in 1994, that is a legitimate artifact of the era and holds up critically. Her proximity to grunge's central tragedy and her documented behavior across the decades since have made her one of the most consistently discussed and divisive figures in alternative rock and hard rock history. The documented record includes multiple public confrontations, physical altercations, social media behavior that has generated significant legal consequences, and a relationship with the press and with her own public image that has been consistently volatile. She has also been one of the more candid people in rock about her own struggles, in interviews that are occasionally remarkably self-aware. The full picture is more complicated than a simple listing of incidents suggests, but the incidents themselves are real and extensively documented. Number 6. Fred Durst. Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit represented a specific moment in late 1990s rock, a fusion of metal, hip-hop, and aggression that generated enormous commercial success and, in retrospect, an almost equally enormous critical backlash. Durst's public conduct during Limp Bizkit's peak years included the Woodstock 1999 performance, where his commentary from the stage, "I don't think you should mellow out," has been extensively analyzed in the context of the violence, sexual assaults, and property destruction that occurred during and after the set. Durst has given interviews since in which he has addressed the Woodstock events and the broader legacy of that period. His current relationship with his own back catalog and public image is more nuanced than his conduct at the time suggested it would be. Number 5. Gary Glitter. Gary Glitter was a successful glam rock performer in the 1970s in the United Kingdom, with a string of chart hits that were genuinely commercially dominant in that era. He is now one of the most convicted and imprisoned artists in British music history, having been found guilty of offenses against children across multiple trials spanning from 1999 to 2015. He is serving a 16-year sentence. His music has been largely removed from commercial broadcast in the UK and in most other markets. There is nothing ambiguous about his record. Number 4. Ted Nugent, Revisited. Nugent appears at number 4 as a separate entry from his earlier placement, because the source material treats them as two entries, reflecting two different dimensions of his reputation: the on-stage performer and the off-stage public figure. The substance is consistent with what was covered above. Number 3. Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine's dismissal from Metallica in April 1983, driven off a tour bus in New York, after escalating conflicts with other band members over his alcohol and drug use and his behavior, is one of the most consequential events in metal history. It led directly to the formation of Megadeth, one of the 4 canonical thrash metal bands, and to a body of work that includes records, Peace Sells, Rust in Peace, Countdown to Extinction, that have a legitimate claim to significance within the genre. The bitterness surrounding his Metallica dismissal remained publicly visible for decades. Mustaine gave interviews throughout the 1980s and 1990s in which he addressed his former band in terms that kept the wound open, and Metallica's 2004 documentary Some Kind of Monster included footage of a meeting between Mustaine and James Hetfield that became one of the more discussed scenes in rock documentary filmmaking. Mustaine's personnel turnover at Megadeth across their career has been extensive. The band has had more than 50 members over its history, and former members' accounts of the working environment have been consistently described as demanding and, in several cases, untenable. Mustaine has spoken in recent years about his conversion to Christianity and describes himself as having addressed many of the behavioral patterns that defined his earlier career. Number 2. Ritchie Blackmore. Ritchie Blackmore is one of the most technically accomplished and historically significant guitarists in hard rock and heavy metal. His work with Deep Purple across the early to mid-1970s, Machine Head, Perfect Strangers, the Made in Japan live recording, constitutes foundational material in the genre, and his subsequent work with Rainbow produced records that influenced the development of power metal significantly. The professional record is also one of the most consistently documented cases of difficult behavior in rock history. Blackmore fired and replaced bandmates without warning across both Deep Purple and Rainbow at a rate that was unusual even by the standards of the genre. Former band members have described an environment of psychological unpredictability, never knowing from day to day what mood he would be in or what he would decide to change without discussion. He walked off stages mid-performance on multiple documented occasions when conditions did not meet his standards. His departures from Deep Purple, twice, in 1975 and again in 1993, were followed by extensive public commentary from both sides about what had gone wrong. He has not rejoined Deep Purple since the second departure and has maintained distance from that chapter of his career while continuing to perform in a medieval folk rock context with his band Blackmore's Night. Number 1. Axl Rose. Axl Rose is the most prominent entry on this list, for reasons that are documented across an unusually sustained period of time and an unusually diverse range of incident types. As the founder and sole consistent member of Guns N' Roses, the band that produced Appetite for Destruction, one of the best-selling debut albums in rock history, Rose occupies a position in metal and hard rock that is genuinely significant. The behavioral record is also genuinely extensive. Rose's late starts to concerts became one of the most well-documented patterns in rock. Shows beginning 2, 3, and on multiple occasions more than 3 hours after scheduled start times, leading to riots in Montreal in 1992 and St. Louis in 1991 that caused significant property damage and injuries. The St. Louis incident at the Riverport Amphitheater began when Rose left the stage and charged into the audience after a fan he believed was photographing him, triggering a full riot that resulted in dozens of injuries and an arrest warrant for Rose. The original Guns N' Roses lineup, Slash, Duff McKagan, Izzy Stradlin, and Steven Adler alongside Rose, disintegrated through the early 1990s in a series of departures that multiple former members have attributed in part to the working dynamics around Rose. Stradlin left in 1991, Adler had been dismissed in 1990. Slash and McKagan both departed by 1996. The band Rose subsequently assembled for the Chinese Democracy album recorded across approximately 15 years and at a reported cost of over $13 million. An album that was eventually released in 2008. In 2016, the classic lineup reunited for the Not in This Lifetime tour, which became one of the highest-grossing concert tours in history. Rose's public statements about other musicians over the decades have included documented attacks on former bandmates, contemporaries, and critics that were sustained and specific. His conduct at various points has included incidents with photographers, journalists, and fans that generated significant press coverage and, in several cases, legal consequences. He remains one of the most commercially significant figures in the history of rock, and one of the most consistently documented cases of the relationship between extraordinary talent and profoundly difficult professional behavior. 20 names. From ego and volatility to documented criminality. This list covers the full range of what difficult means in the context of rock and metal history. Some of these people made great music. Some of that music stands on its own regardless of who made it. Some of it is harder to separate from the behavior. Drop a comment. Who surprised you? Who you think doesn't belong here? Or who you'd add to a follow-up list? Like the video if this was worth your time. Subscribe for more real history from rock and metal, and we'll see you in the next one.